The gesture. The Celestial Winds was supposed to be a simple luxury liner, ferrying diplomats and wealthy traders across the galaxy in comfort. For Ethan Cole, a deep space mechanic, the first-class ticket represented months of saved credits, a rare treat after grueling work in the outer colonies. He had just settled into his spacious seat, savoring an expensive drink he'd never normally afford, when the murmurs began. Heads turned toward the boarding gate, conversations shifting from hushed to excited. Even the polished attendants straightened their postures. Then Ethan saw why. A dragon stepped aboard, not just any dragon, but clearly an elder. His massive frame was covered in dark crimson scales that caught the station lights, wings folded but radiating power. Silver scars traced across his snout and chest, testament to countless battles. The very air seemed to grow heavy with his presence. General Verisanther. Even Ethan, who worked the far reaches of space, knew that name. The hero of Sycorax, defender of the Outer Rim, a living legend who had held the line against impossible odds when entire fleets fell around him. But something was wrong. The general moved slowly, each step deliberate, his breathing labored. The fire that should have burned in those ancient eyes was dimmed by exhaustion. This wasn't just travel, this was struggle. Ethan frowned as he watched the attendants whisper among themselves. They were directing Verisanther toward economy class. That made no sense. Dragons rarely traveled commercial, and when they did, special accommodations were always made. The Celestial Winds had private suites designed for their kind. Yet the attendants hesitated, their gazes flickering away when the general questioned them. Someone had slighted him, whether through error or intention, Ethan couldn't tell. But he recognized injustice when he saw it. Without overthinking, he stood. "Sir." An attendant approached, her polished smile faltering. "Is there a problem?" "Yeah," Ethan said, adjusting his jacket. "Give him my seat." The attendant blinked. "Excuse me." "My seat," Ethan repeated, nodding toward Verisanther. "Give it to him." Whispers rippled through the cabin. Some passengers scoffed, others murmured approval. The attendant's gaze flicked to a supervisor, a pale Vrothy who merely nodded after a moment's consideration. Ethan didn't wait for further discussion. He picked up his bag and stepped aside, gesturing toward the now empty seat. Verisanther, who had been quietly observing, exhaled through his nostrils. A thin stream of smoke curled into the air. "You would give up your place for me?" His voice was deep, resonant, but touched with unexpected weariness. "You've earned it," Ethan replied simply. For a long moment, the dragon studied him. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he stepped forward and took the seat. The attendants scrambled to adjust environmental settings, their earlier reluctance melting into hurried efficiency. Ethan found himself escorted to economy class, squeezed between two overly perfumed traders. He didn't mind, he'd grown up on mining stations where personal space was a myth. As the ship prepared for takeoff, he settled back and closed his eyes. He had no idea that his simple act of respect would soon save all their lives. Under attack. Barely an hour into the flight, the ship shuddered violently. Ethan's eyes snapped open as overhead lights flickered. The intercom crackled with static before a nervous voice announced something about emergency power fluctuations. But Ethan knew better, years working on freighters had trained his instincts. This wasn't mechanical failure. The subtle wrongness in the ship's hum, the specific pattern of the vibrations, this was sabotage. Panic spread through economy as the ship lurched again. Artificial gravity stuttered, sending loose items floating before snapping them back down. An insectoid passenger in front of Ethan shrieked, his limbs flailing against his restraints. Others shouted, some fumbling with harnesses while experienced travelers sat eerily silent, bracing for worse. Through the gap between seats, Ethan caught sight of first class. Verisanther had risen to his feet, his massive frame moving with surprising grace despite his earlier exhaustion. His talons curled slightly, nostrils flaring as he scanned the cabin. The old dragon wasn't panicking, he was assessing. Ethan recognized that look. Pure, focused calculation. The general was piecing together the same conclusions Ethan had reached. Then the alarms began to scream. Emergency lights bathed the cabin in dull red as a mechanical voice droned warnings, hull breach detected. Emergency lockdown initiated. All passengers remained seated. The command was pointless. Terror had already gripped the ship. Another violent jolt sent Ethan's stomach lurching as artificial gravity wavered between normal and null before settling at a weaker level. The ship was losing power fast. Then the intercom crackled again, but this time, it wasn't the ship's automated system. Attention passengers aboard the Celestial Winds. The voice was cold, sharp. Remain calm. This vessel is now under our control. A deep, eerie silence followed. The ship's crew had been cut off. Whoever had taken control had done so completely. Ethan felt ice settle in his veins as the reality hit him. They were being boarded by pirates, and not the kind who were interested in ransom negotiations. These were the type who cleaned out passenger ships and left no witnesses. Through the chaos, he saw movement in first class. Verisanther was no longer at his seat. The ancient dragon had moved to the aisle, and despite his earlier weariness, power seemed to radiate from him now. His head turned slowly, systematically cataloging every detail, passenger positions, structural weak points, possible weapons. The war hero was preparing for battle. But could one exhausted dragon, no matter how legendary, stand against an entire pirate crew? And would he even try, for a ship full of strangers who had shown him nothing but indifference? Ethan remembered the look in those ember eyes when he'd offered his seat, surprise, gratitude, and something else. Recognition of honor where none was expected. As heavy footsteps echoed through the ship's corridors, growing closer, Ethan realized they were all about to find out exactly what General Verisanther was made of. Unlikely alliance. The boarding party's footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the harsh buzz of cutting tools. They were slicing through the ship's security doors like they were made of paper. Professional pirates with military-grade equipment, this was no random attack. Ethan unbuckled his harness and crept forward through the panicked passengers. He needed to reach the maintenance panel he'd spotted earlier. If these pirates had disabled the ship's defenses, maybe he could restore some of them. "Where do you think you're going?" hissed one of the perfumed traders beside him. "To help," Ethan whispered back, then ignored the man's protests. He made it 3 rows before a massive shadow fell across him. Verisanther stood in the aisle, blocking his path. Up close, the dragon was even more imposing, scales like armor plating, eyes that held the wisdom and weariness of centuries. "You should stay in your seat, human," the general rumbled quietly. "And you should be resting," Ethan replied, meeting those ember eyes directly. "But we both know that's not happening." For a moment, something almost like amusement flickered across the dragon's features. "You are the one who gave me his seat. And you're the one who held the line at Sycorax when everyone else wanted to retreat." Verisanther studied him intently. "What is your name?" "Ethan Cole." "Mechanic, mostly. And I'm guessing you need one right about now." The sounds of cutting grew closer, accompanied by rough voices shouting orders. Whatever window they had was closing fast. "The ship's defensive systems are offline," Verisanther said quietly. "The bridge crew is likely dead or captured." "But not the manual overrides," Ethan said. "I can restore partial power to the security bulkheads, maybe even some of the defensive grids. Buy us time." "Time for what?" "I am old, human. Tired. These scales have seen too many battles." Ethan looked at the passengers around them, terrified families, young children, elderly couples who had probably saved for years for this one luxury trip. "Maybe. But you're still Verisanther. And they're counting on us." The dragon's gaze swept over the cabin, taking in the frightened faces. When his eyes returned to Ethan, something had changed in them. The ember glow was brighter now, more focused. show me these overrides. They moved together through the cabin, Verisanther's presence somehow calming the panicked passengers. Ethan led him to a maintenance alcove near the galley, his fingers dancing over control panels he'd learned to navigate on dozens of different ship classes. There, he said as systems came online. Security bulkheads are back up, and I've got partial power to the closed defense turrets. Good. That will slow them, but not stop them. A tremendous crash echoed through the ship as the pirates finally breached the main airlock. Shouts and weapon fire followed as they encountered the restored security measures. Verisanther straightened to his full height, and for the first time since boarding, he looked every inch the legendary general. They will come through the maintenance shafts next. Can you seal those? Already on it, Ethan said, his hands flying over the controls. But they'll just cut through again. Not if we make them too busy to try. The dragon smiled then, and it was a terrifying thing, all teeth and barely contained fire. I may be old, mechanic, but I am far from finished. And thanks to you, I remember what it means to fight for others. Ethan felt a chill of anticipation run down his spine. He'd heard the stories of what General Verisanther could do in battle. Now he was about to see them firsthand. What do you need me to do? He asked. Keep those systems running, Verisanther said, moving toward the cabin's main aisle. And when this is over, perhaps you'll join me for that drink in first class. As the dragon strode away, smoke beginning to curl from his nostrils, Ethan couldn't help but grin. The pirates had no idea what they were about to face. The final stand. The first pirate to enter the passenger cabin never knew what hit him. Verisanther moved like liquid death, his massive frame flowing through the narrow aisle with impossible grace. One moment the heavily armed raider was advancing with confidence, the next he was airborne, launched by a casual swipe of the dragon's tail into the bulkhead with a sickening crunch. Dragon, shouted another pirate, raising some kind of plasma rifle. Take him down. What followed could barely be called a fight. It was more like watching a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. Verisanther's roar shook the entire ship, a sound that spoke of eons of fury and power barely held in check. His massive wings spread as much as the cabin allowed, and suddenly the air was filled with smoke and the scent of sulfur. The first blast of dragon fire turned two pirates to ash before they could even scream. Ethan, still working frantically at the control panels, watched in awe and terror as the legend came to life before his eyes. This wasn't the exhausted, weary creature who had boarded the ship. This was the General Verisanther of stories, the dragon who had single-handedly turned the tide at Sycorax. But even legends had limits. More pirates poured through the breached sections, their weapons adapted for fighting large targets. Energy nets sparked around Verisanther's limbs, and electromagnetic harpoons bit deep into his scales. The old dragon stumbled, his flames sputtering as the nets conducted painful shocks through his body. Got you now, lizard, snarled the pirate captain as he entered the cabin. A scarred Calithan with cybernetic implants, he carried a weapon Ethan recognized with sick dread, a neural disruptor designed specifically for dragons. Verisanther collapsed to one knee, the energy nets holding him fast. Blood seeped from between his scales where the harpoons had found their mark. He looked toward Ethan, and in those ember eyes was an apology, and a plea. Ethan understood. Keep the passengers safe. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless. But Ethan had never been good at following orders when they didn't make sense. Instead of staying at his station, he grabbed a plasma cutter from the maintenance kit and crept along the wall behind the pirates. They were focused entirely on their legendary prize, never thinking to watch for threats from a simple human mechanic. The first pirate never felt the plasma cutter slice through his armor. The second spun around just in time to catch the tool across his face. Ethan dove for the fallen warrior's weapon as chaos erupted around him. The human, the captain shouted. Kill him. But the distraction was all Verisanther needed. With a roar that seemed to come from the depths of space itself, the dragon surged to his feet, snapping the weakened energy nets. His claws found the captain's throat before the Calathon could fire his neural disruptor. You made one mistake, Verisanther rumbled, lifting the captain off his feet. You threatened someone under my protection. The remaining pirates broke and ran, but there was nowhere to go on a ship in the middle of space. Verisanther's fire followed them, and within minutes, the threat was ended. In the sudden silence that followed, the dragon and the mechanic looked at each other across the smoke-filled cabin. Verisanther was wounded, exhausted, but alive. The passengers were safe. You didn't stay at your station, the general observed. Neither did you, Ethan replied, offering the dragon a support as he swayed on his feet. Verisanther's laugh was like distant thunder. No, I suppose I didn't. As sirens wailed and emergency systems restored power throughout the ship, Ethan realized something had changed. Not just in the ship's status, but in the way the other passengers looked at them both. Respect, gratitude, awe, but something else too. Recognition that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships forge the strongest bonds. Honor repaid. 3 hours later, rescue ships from the Galactic Corps had arrived and the Celestial Winds was limping toward the nearest station under escort. The pirate vessel had been captured, its crew in custody, and the passengers were finally safe. Ethan sat in the ship's medical bay, getting treated for cuts and burns from the fight. Through the viewport, he could see Corps vessels surrounding them, a full squadron deployment that spoke to just how seriously they took attacks on civilian ships. Quite a show you put on back there. Ethan turned to find Verisanther approaching, his wounds properly bandaged but his bearing restored to its full dignity. The exhaustion that had marked him during boarding was gone, replaced by something stronger. We both did, Ethan replied. Though I'm pretty sure you did most of the heavy lifting. The dragon settled beside him with surprising gentleness for such a massive creature. You saved my life, human. When those nets held me, when that captain had his weapon trained on me, your actions freed me to act. You saved everyone's life. I just kept the lights on. Is that what you think? Verisanther's ember eyes held a warmth Ethan hadn't seen before. You gave me your seat when no one else would even meet my eyes. You stood beside me when you could have stayed hidden. You risked yourself for strangers. That is not keeping the lights on, my friend. That is honor. The word hung between them, weighted with significance that transcended species. There's something you should know, Verisanther continued. Those pirates weren't random raiders. They were after me specifically. Someone paid them to eliminate an old relic who knew too much about certain classified operations. Your kindness didn't just gain you a seat upgrade, it put you in the crossfire of an assassination attempt. Ethan absorbed this information quietly. Would it have changed anything if I'd known? Would it? Ethan considered the question seriously, then shook his head. No. Right is right, regardless of the consequences. Verisanther's rumbling laugh filled the medical bay. And that, Ethan Cole, is why I have a proposition for you. Before he could ask what kind of proposition, the medical bay doors opened and a Corps officer entered, a crisp human woman with admiral's stripes. General Verisanther, Mr. Cole, she said, inclining her head respectfully to both of them. Admiral Chen, Corps Intelligence. I wanted to personally thank you both for your actions today. Just doing what needed doing, Ethan said. Actually, Mr. Cole, it was considerably more than that. The pirates' data files show they've been targeting specific individuals across the galaxy, war veterans, retired Corps officers, anyone with knowledge of certain historical events. You and the general stopped what could have been a much larger conspiracy. Verisanther nodded gravely. Which brings me to my proposition, my friend. I'm being recalled to active duty to investigate this conspiracy. I could use a chief engineer I can trust, someone who understands that honor matters more than profit. Ethan stared at him. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a partnership. The galaxy has become a darker place since I retired, but today reminded me that there are still those willing to stand for what's right. I'd be honored to have you watching my back. Ethan looked around the medical bay, at the dragon who had become an unlikely friend, at the admiral who was offering him a chance to make a real difference, at the viewport showing the vast expanse of space beyond. His old life as a freighter mechanic seemed suddenly small and distant. "When do we start?" he asked. Verisanther's smile could have lit up the entire ship. "As soon as you're cleared for duty, Chief Engineer Cole." As they shook hands, or rather, as Ethan grasped one of Verisanther's massive talons, he reflected on how a simple act of kindness had changed everything. He'd given up a first-class seat and gained something far more valuable, a friend, a purpose, and a place in something greater than himself. 6 months later, aboard the core vessel Dragon's Honor, Ethan would still smile when he remembered that moment. General Verisanther had been right about one thing: honor, once recognized, had a way of growing and spreading throughout the galaxy. And sometimes, it all started with offering someone your seat. The end.